Having gained the trust of Emperor Genin and gained enormous power, Fujiwara no Nakamaro was appointed Minister of the Right. He quickly absorbed the latest information about the Tang that he received through the Kintoshi. He applied it to practical policies and promoted politics modeled on the Tang. As part of this, the names of job titles were also changed to Tang style. Specifically, his title, Minister of the Right, was renamed Daio. He was later promoted to the position of Daiho Daijin, which was renamed Daishi. In particular, he was the first vassal to become Daiho Daijin. This was indeed the period when his power was at its height. However, he did not simply seek to increase his status within the imperial court, he sought to build a stronger base of power. So he planned to build a new capital city. In doing so, he referred to the policies implemented in the Tang at the time. During the Tang, in addition to the capital Chang'an, another important city was sometimes established as a political and military base. He took inspiration from this policy and decided to build another city in Japan to rival Haijokyo. And he built Hiranamiya in Omi Province. Omi Province was his base for many years. He probably also aimed to demonstrate his power by building a new city there. Also, at that time in Japan, Buddhism and politics were deeply connected. During the reign of Shomu Emperor, the construction of Tadaiji Temple was carried out as a national project. In this way, Buddhism rapidly expanded its influence and began to have a strong influence on politics and society. However, as the number of monks increased, some began to not follow the rules. Fujiwara no Nakamaro thought, this is not good. He embarked on reforms to restore discipline in the Buddhist community. He established a system to govern monks throughout the country. He then appointed 2 monks, Jianjin and Robin, to head the organization. Jianjin was a monk who traveled from the Tang to Japan and brought the rules of Buddhism to Japan. Robin was a monk who served as the first Beto, or head, of Tadaiji Temple. In this way, Fujiwara no Nakamaro proceeded with the purge of the chaotic Buddhist world. This was not simply a religious reform, it also aimed to prevent monks from interfering too much in politics and to ensure the stability of the nation. On the other hand, he was active not only in domestic governance but also in military policy. A symbolic example of this is our expansion into the Tohoku region. At that time in Japan, there were people called Emishi who lived in what is now the Tohoku region. The Emishi were not under the control of the imperial court and had their own unique culture and society. As a result, the imperial court viewed the region as a land to be conquered and sought to expand its control. The imperial court had already begun to expand into the Tohoku region. They built the palisades of Taga Castle and used it as their military and administrative base. However, the Emishi put up a fierce resistance, and the battle dragged on. Under these circumstances, Fujiwara no Nakamaro strengthened his power and came to lead the nation's military policy. He decided to begin full-scale operations in the Tohoku region and entrusted his son with the responsibility. In this way, the development of castles and roads was promoted, and the influence of the imperial court in the Tohoku region expanded. Naturally, this policy led to further deepening conflict with the Emishi, and it later escalated into a massive fight. Fujiwara no Nakamaro also planned to expand his influence not only to the Tohoku region but also to Shilla on the Chosen. Since its defeat at the Battle of Bikejiyang, Japan had long desired to invade Shilla. Under these circumstances, the Japanese envoys who traveled to Tang clashed with the Shilla envoys over seating order. The Shilla envoys were expected to sit at a higher position than the Japanese envoys. Japanese envoys protested to the Tang and requested that the seating order be reversed. The Tang dynasty accepted this and changed the seat of the Shilla envoys to a lower position than that of the Japanese envoys. This was very humiliating for Shilla. Afterwards, Japanese envoys were sent to Shilla. At that time, Shilla forbade them from meeting the king and treated Japan coldly. As a result, relations between Japan and Shilla deteriorated. More and more people began to argue that Japan should invade Shilla. Moreover, at that time, Balhae was actively contacting Japan in order to strengthen its alliance. Fujiwara no Nakamaro saw this as a golden opportunity and attempted to cooperate with Balhae to put pressure on Shilla. However, due to a poor harvest in Japan, many people across the country died of starvation. Japan could no longer afford to invade other countries, so his plan to invade Shilla was thwarted. Now let's turn our attention back to domestic developments. Until then, the Emperor of Japan of the Nara period had been descendants of Prince Kusakabe, the son of Emperor Tenmu. However, with the death of this line, the imperial line passed to the descendants of Prince Tonari, who was also the son of Emperor Tenmu. And Emperor of Japan Junin ascended to the throne from this new imperial line. With the new imperial lineage established, its legitimacy needed to be strengthened. Empress Dowager Komyo then advised Emperor Junin to bestow the title of honor on his father, Prince Tonari. By elevating the status of Prince Tonari, she sought to emphasize the legitimacy of the new imperial line. However, the retired Empress Koken opposed this. For her, this decision meant that the imperial line would be removed from her family. So she wasn't happy about it. When Emperor of Japan Junin was consulted, she said that he should refrain from bestowing the honorific title on Prince Tonari. Nevertheless, Empress Dowager Komyo repeatedly encouraged him to do so. Therefore, he ultimately dedicated the title to his father, Prince Tonari. Thus a feud arose between the retired Empress Koken and Emperor of Japan Junin, who became dissatisfied with him. Her mother, Empress Dowager Komyo, then began to restrain her. However, Empress Dowager Komyo eventually passed away at the age of 60. She had held real power in the imperial court for many years, so her death marked a major turning point. This meant that Fujiwara no Nakamaro had lost his greatest backer. On the other hand, the retired Empress Koken was now able to act freely with the death of her mother, who had previously oppressed her. Thus, the conflict between the faction of Emperor of Japan Junin and Fujiwara no Nakamaro and the retired Empress Koken became decisive. Once again, the bitter fight began. Under these circumstances, the retired Empress Koken and Emperor of Japan Junin imperial visit Namiya to renovate Haijokyo. However, during this imperial visit, the retired Empress Koken fell ill and was cared for by a monk named Dokyo. This incident led her to become deeply devoted to Dokyo. On the other hand, Emperor Junin was not pleased with her excessive favoritism towards Dokyo. So he gave her many pieces of advice about Dokyo. And she was furious. Their conflict became decisive. They suddenly returned to Haijo Palace and began living separately. After her retirement, Empress Koken announced that she would become an ordination and disciple of Buddha. At the same time, she issued orders significantly restricting Emperor Junin's powers. Junin only handles the small things, and I handle the big things. I will strip Junin of his Emperor of Japan rights. She declared so. However, it was Emperor of Japan Junin who had the necessary seal to make the order official. Therefore, the orders of the retired Empress Koken had no legal effect and could not be enforced. Therefore, although Emperor Junin and Fujiwara no Nakamaro continued to govern the country, a clash between the two forces became inevitable. In response to this situation, Fujiwara no Nakamaro assembled a large army in the capital and began taking action to suppress the retired Empress Koken. However, she learned through a tip that he was preparing for battle. In response to this, she used Shonagon to seize the seal held by Emperor of Japan Junin. Fujiwara no Nakamaro was shocked to hear this news. He was going to take a legitimate approach and use his military might to subdue her. So he didn't expect her to suddenly take the seal away from him. He quickly sent his son to try and get the seal back. But she sent more troops and shot his son dead. He sent reinforcements, but they too were shot dead. And the seal was finally hers. The retired Empress Koken took this opportunity to immediately label Fujiwara no Nakamaro and his family as rebellion. He started a rebellion. His orders are invalid. He will be stripped of his official title and the Fujiwara name. She declared so. Thus, Fujiwara no Nakamaro, who had accomplished an unprecedented feat, was instantly deemed an enemy of the state. As he became a target, Emperor Junin also became a target. Emperor Junin was arrested and placed under house arrest, after which he was stripped of Emperor of Japan title.
Having lost everything, Fujiwara no Nakamaro gathered his family and escaped from Haijokyo.
He headed for Omi Province, his longtime base. He likely planned to launch a counterattack from the Omi Province office building that he had set up himself. However, the retired Empress Koken was aware of his actions. She sent her troops ahead and burned the bridge. This prevented him from entering the government building. Furthermore, his companions who were inside the building were also captured one by one. Thus, his plan completely failed. His last hope was to seek refuge in Echizen province, where his son was chief. But she also understood that. She led her troops ahead and seized control of Echizen's provincial capital. Her troops were also stationed at the checkpoints. Without knowing this, he headed north with his companions and attempted to break through the checkpoint. However, they were stopped by her troops who were waiting for them and were forced to retreat. With no way to escape, they turned back and headed south the way they came. However, they collided with the main body of her army, which was pursuing them. Finally, they were defeated in a decisive battle. Thus, Fujiwara no Nakamaro's faction was wiped out at the end of the battle, and the retired Empress Koken was victorious. She then ascended to the Emperor of Japan again as Empress Shotoku. There was no one who could stop her then. Her father, Shomu Emperor, and her mother, Empress Dowager Komio, had already passed away. There was no interim Emperor of Japan, no retired emperor to look after her. She came from the most noble lineage and demonstrated overwhelming strength by defeating Fujiwara no Nakamaro. This gave her immense power. Meanwhile, what happened to Emperor Junin, who was already under house arrest? He was accused of conspiring with Fujiwara no Nakamaro to remove the retired Empress Koken and was exiled to Awajishima. In this way, people who had been driven out by the Fujiwara no Nakamaro faction were gradually returned to the imperial court. Among them was Fujiwara no Nakamaro's older brother, Toyonari, who had been demoted for his involvement in the Tachibana no Naramuro incident.
But the person who attracted the most attention was a monk, Dokyo, who had been appointed to the new position of Minister Zen Master. Empress Shotoku became Emperor of Japan again after becoming an ordination.
An ordination emperor deserves ordination ministers as well. With these words, she conscripted Dokyo and elevated him to the center of government. Thus began Buddhist politics under Empress Shotoku and her favorite, Dokyo.